Hello, hello everyone. My name is Kagan McFadden, and on behalf of the VFA Board of Directors, I want to welcome you to What Short Stories Can Do, curated by the Malahat Review and featuring authors Dylan Clark, Corinna Chong, Gaston, and Shazia Hafiz Ramji. Though this is a virtual event, the Victoria Festival of Authors is located on the traditional ancestral territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people, also known as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. We acknowledge the ancestors, hereditary leaders, and matriarchs, as well as the creators from these lands, and we give thanks for the privilege of living and working here. We remain committed to serving as learners and listeners. Thank you to our funders and sponsors for the festival, the Canada Council for the Arts, the BC Arts Council, and the Province of British Columbia, the CRD, the City of Victoria, the Victoria Foundation, Access Copyright, and Munro's Books. This event, as all VFA events, offers closed captioning. Please click the double C at the bottom of your screen to view the captions. Please also use the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen if you have questions for us or for the authors during the event. The moderator will be able to get to some of these questions at the end of the panel. This panel is moderated by Iain Higgins, editor of the Malahat Review and a member of the English Department and Medieval Studies program at the University of Victoria. Hi, Iain.
Thanks. I'd like to welcome everyone to this virtual VFA event, What Short Stories Can Do, and thank you all for attending. The event is, as Kagan said, also sponsored by the Malahat Review, which has its home at the University of Victoria. I've been introduced as Iain Higgins. I'm also the magazine's current editor and going to be your moderator today. And I'm also here as an uninvited guest on unceded Indigenous lands as a settler and the child of immigrants to the nation state of Canada. So I want to follow Kagan's introduction and begin our session in a good way by saying that I acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen, Songhees and Esquimalt peoples on whose territory the University of Victoria stands, and the Lekwungen and Saanich peoples on whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. I happen to be in Montreal today, which is also known as Tiohtià:ke, so I'd like to acknowledge and respect the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, whose unceded territory this is and which has historically been a gathering place for many First Nations. Territorial acknowledgements like these are but a small way of recognizing that if there is only one Earth, there are many worlds. And as it happens, questions of multiple worlds are the subject of today's discussion amongst four wonderful writers of compelling short fiction. All writing necessarily involves some degree of invention of worlds, world making, but short fiction in particular confronts writers and readers with the challenges and pleasures of compression, of entering deeply into worlds even smaller than those evoked in the novel. Like you, I'm excited to hear how these four writers think about the work of short storytelling. To get us started, I will briefly introduce all four writers in the order of their readings. Each of them will read for about 5 minutes, and that will be followed by about 10 minutes of discussion amongst the four panelists. So about 4 quarters overall, as if this were a literary basketball game. And if all goes well, we'll have a little bit of time at the end. So today's first reader is Corinna Chong, whose second novel, Badland, was just longlisted for the 2024 Giller Prize. And congratulations, Corinna. She's also the author of the short story collection, The Whole Animal, and professor of English and Fine Arts. Following Corinna will be Dylan Clark, a recent graduate of UVic in writing and history, who's currently studying community planning at UBC and emerging as a writer of really fascinating short stories. Third will be Shazia Hafiz Ramji, author of Port of Being, which was a finalist for the Vancouver Book Award, the BC Book Prizes, the Gerald Lampart Memorial Award, and also the recipient of the Robert Crouch Award for Innovative Poetry. She lives in London, England, Toronto, and Vancouver, though not all at the same time, and is at work on a novel. And last, hardly least, is Gaston, who's well known to Victoria readers and lives nearby on Gabriola Island. And his 8th collection of fiction will be published in the new year. And earlier books of Bill's have variously won or been shortlisted for the Governor General's Award and the Giller, BC, and Victoria Book Prizes. So that's it for the introductions. And please welcome our first reader, Corinna Chong.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the organizers of the festival for inviting us and Iain for organizing this. I'm really grateful to be here. And just to mention, coming at you from Syilx Okanagan territory, And I'm grateful to be a settler here as well. So I'm going to read to you from my story, Punctum, which was published in the Malahat Review 226. So this story, Punctum, begins with an epigraph from Roland Barthes' Camera Lucida. Sting, speck, cut, little hole. That accident which pricks me, but also bruises me, is poignant to me. What she liked about the masks was that there was nothing subtle about them. Ugly, they announced. People avoided her, the weird artist with emotional problems. Even other artists avoided her, mistrustful of the blatancy of her metaphor. She would smile at them from across the shared studio space, and they would return smiles flimsy with trepidation. The mask she was finishing now was caked with a thick, gooey layer of epoxied mac and cheese. She'd been thrilled that she'd managed to figure out the technicalities of preserving the texture of the sauce, gone sticky after sitting too long, the noodles clinging to each other in lumps. On the cheekbones, a few squirts of ketchup, darkened to blood red under the resin, wormed down the lumps. The mask was one of a series of 12 that Ivy would be presenting at the end of the month to Silk Machine, a private gallery on 11th Ave, that had exhibited her previous sculpture series last year. She'd already made a mask with ground beef and peas, another with burned fish sticks and tartar sauce. Blue and white, cake with bubblegum icing and buttered mashed potatoes were next. Lining the eye holes of each, peeking through the food, were the distinctive black strokes swooping up like wings of traditional Chinese opera masks. She would be displaying them fitted over plaster busts cast from her own body, lined up one behind the other in the middle of the gallery space. Viewers would be invited to walk among them, weaving between to get close enough to discern that yes, it was not artful simulation, but real food. Real, familiar food that would inevitably conjure up visceral reactions and even memories. This mattered to them. It was the punctum, Trevor, the director of the gallery, had explained to her, practically giddy when she'd pitched her ideas for the project. She'd had to look the word up. They were not made to be worn. She'd told this to Javi the day before, annoyed at the time that it even needed to be said. But now, working alone in the studio by the dim light of her desk lamp, she felt compelled to try. She lifted the mac and cheese mask to her face and pulled the elastic strap over her head. She'd used herself to cast the plaster base, but somehow it still surprised her how neatly her face slid into the contours of the mask, a slight suction locking it into place. She looked out through the small holes cut in the center of the eyes, which framed triangles of cropped shadows against the orange glow that the lamplight had thrown on the wall. The stinging smell of resin laced with old cheese filled her nostrils. When she got home late that night, Javi was still up, watching Kitchen Casino. The two contestants left, battling out for the grand prize, were scurrying about their kitchens, scooping guava and vacuum sealing salmon fillets into plastic packets. "How'd it go?" Javi called out, his gaze still on the screen. "Fine," Ivy said. "I think I got it this time. 8th time's the charm." "Nice," he said. Nice. Ivy went straight to her room, closing the door behind her. Lately, everything Javi said had been irritating her, scratching at her like a tag in the neckline of her shirt. She was not built for cohabitating. This she'd known for years. But when Javi had appeared at her door, his face so crumpled up in anguish that she'd hardly recognized him, she had invited him to stay. "Of course not, you're my brother," she'd insisted, when he'd suggested it might be awkward. But it was awkward. He was only 23, 13 years younger than her, and they hadn't lived in the same house since she'd gone to university in Montreal almost 20 years ago. She'd moved back to Calgary when Javi was 19 and still being babied by their mother, who dutifully picked up the cheesies, Ichiban instant noodle packages, and 4-liter jugs of milk he requested each weekend from the grocery store, and cooked him dinner each evening, which he would eat upstairs in his room while he played video games. When Bonnie, their older sister, called last fall to tell Ivy that Javi had a new girlfriend, Ivy nearly choked on her drink. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Corinna. Maybe we'll start with a question for you and then open it up for all of you. Like Bill, you're also someone who's published long fiction, and yet you haven't stopped writing short stories. So I'm wondering if you could say what, for you as a writer, attracts you to that shorter form.
That was for me, sorry, or for Bill?
No, it's for you.
What attracts me to the shorter form? Yeah.
Like Bill, a novelist, so.
Yeah, I am I love short stories. They're my kind of my first love. And I think that what I appreciate about short stories is that they're a bit freer in terms of their structure for me. And I find short stories to be almost a little bit of a game sometimes, where I don't necessarily have to start with a sense of plot or where the narrative is going to go. I can start with a kernel of an idea. I can start with an image. I can start with a sentence and just kind of build around that idea, almost like building layers on a pearl. And that sort of exploratory process I find really energizing and fun, and just instructive for me as a writer. I feel like I grow in the process of writing every story, and each one is its own unique project.
Have you ever had the desire to turn a story into a novel, or is the story its own thing for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have never had that happen to me, actually. I know that happens to a lot of writers where they might begin with a story and then discover in the process of writing that it's actually a much larger story, that needs to be turned into a novel. Personally, that's never happened to me. I've always stories are always stories. They form in my mind as short pieces. And I've only ever come up with 2 novel ideas, and I've only written 2 novels. So I feel I'm still kind of feeling my way through the novel writing process. But as of yet, yeah, I've always conceived of stories as being shorter works.
Do you think of them in relation to one another or as freestanding? Because your story collection was called The Whole Animal, which, of course, in some ways suggests that the book is put together out of, the sort of the flank and the rump and the various other bits of meat to create a beast. Did you think of the book that way, or?
Yeah, definitely not. That book was comprised of stories that I'd written over the 15 years prior to the publication of the book. So most of those stories I'd written, they were written very far apart in time, and never with the necessarily intention to put them together as a book. And for me, the title "The Whole Animal" has a lot of irony built into it, because I think not only are those stories each kind of self-contained, of course, there's running themes that are common across them, but they are there's so much about fragmentation, and about a sense of isolation. And so, yeah, I think the word whole operates kind of ironically in that title as well.
Any of the other panelists want to join in this conversation, or have anything you want to ask Corinna here? Bill?
Yes, I have a question. Corinna, maybe, am I on screen? Yeah, okay. Corinna, hi, Corinna. I don't think we've met before. It's nice to meet you. You partially answered it, but I'm just really curious. I loved Puncton, and I couldn't help but wonder, because it's so perfect structurally and the way it resolves, I'll try not to give it all away or anything like that, because I'm sure some viewers haven't read it yet, but just the way it's about masks, the artist creating masks, which are so wonderful, especially the mask that has mold So it's art creating itself in this disgustingly perfect way. But then with her misreading of what in effect is the brother's mask that he's been wearing all along, the irony is crushing, and it just works so beautifully that this artist of masks can't read them, even with people she loves. So I have to ask, was this kind of perfect scenario, was it preconceived, or did you happen upon it when you were adding that last layer of pearl?
Oh gosh, thank you for that question. And those compliments, I'm like, I don't even know what to say coming from a writer I admire as much as you. So I so appreciate that. So this story, I think sort of thematically, I had it all in my head, and it unfolded with those ideas, those intentions in mind. So I did want, like I mean, it began with the idea of the punctum, which I read in Roland Barthes' Camera Lucida, and I just thought this was a really interesting idea. I've been reading a lot about photography and the way we consume images, and so Barthes' theory that there are some photographs, particularly, that have um, this almost unspeakable power about them. It's almost like a reaching out. The photograph is reaching out and grabbing you, grabbing the viewer emotionally, and gripping them and pricking them. Right? It's this almost violent action of like getting through your skin, so that you feel the photograph rather than just viewing it as an outsider, as an observer. And so I thought this was a really interesting idea. And I was also looking at a lot of art by the artist Cindy Sherman, who I really love, and she does a lot of these grotesque images and abject art that's sort of repulsive, but also really oddly compelling. And so I wanted to play with the idea of an artist who would be trying to go for this sort of shock value, shock factor, and try. She's attempting herself to lure viewers in and to sort of put this feature into her work, almost like the punctum, right? That will grab the emotions and grip the viewer. And at the same time, she is chronically unable to actually connect emotionally with anybody outside of herself, right? So um, this includes her own brother, of course, who through the story is struggling. She almost refuses to see that. She only sees the exterior. She is pretty callous toward him and doesn't really recognize until we get to the end of the story that he's actually really depressed. She sees him as being just kind of lazy and unmotivated. And so that kind of yeah, that disconnect between her and her reality, I thought was a really interesting kind of irony, as you mentioned, where she's trying to achieve a kind of closeness through her art, but in doing so, she's actually putting everybody else at more of a remove, and distancing herself even further. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think I had those ideas kind of in mind from the beginning, just as a way of exploring this idea of the punctum and all its really interesting implications.
Thanks to Bill for that great question and Corinna for that answer. Just to keep us on track, I'm going to move to Dylan. You've just given me a perfect segue because we're talking about punctum and piercing, and shell casing is the important thing in the story that Dylan is going to be reading from.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks everybody for tuning in today. I'm calling in from the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. This story is called Safety, and it appears in issue 226 of the Malahat Review, and I'll just jump right into it. Did all fathers have a bullet casing in their head? Jamie couldn't tell because he had never seen his father, but he'd seen the fathers of the other boys at school. He'd seen Doug's father. All of those fathers had a bullet casing. The top of their skull had been replaced by a bulbous glass fishbowl within which rattled the casing. When they walked or shook their heads in slow disapproval at Jamie, the casings would clink clink, clink on the glass. When they laughed, whenever one of the boys made a clever joke, say, the casings would hum like satisfied wasps. Doug was good at those jokes. Each had only one casing in their skull, of course. The caliber and metal had to be carefully chosen to represent your identity. The casing separated men from boys. In preparation, the boys would hoard the casings, fawn over them, gamble with them. During recess, they all tumbled through the iron doors of the student manufactory, which manufactured students who would one day metamorphose into workers, and gathered in the yard. The yard was light brown, and a haze of dust floated from it that smelled of sawdust and sweat. Each day they made a circle in the yard and packed close as they could, elbows brushing, lungs squeezed small by the pressure of the crowd they became. The yard was flat. Before they left for their dwellings, the boys would undertake their final class, which consisted of leveling any elevation in the yard with straight razors. This class was called Applied Philosophy, and Jamie excelled at it. It made sense. Each bump needed to disappear, so he swept the footprints away, one grain at a time, minutely and perfectly. As a result of its flatness, the boys could roll casings very easily. Doug would draw the circle in the center, because only the best boy could draw the circle. And then they would see who could keep their casing closest to the center by the time the alarm rang. You laid on the ground, head cocked, and with one finger only, you flicked the casing. If you didn't hit it straight on, it would go off kilter, and then you were screwed. Jamie was frequently screwed. You can't aim for shit, Doug would joke. He was right. Truth be told, Jamie didn't really like casings that much. He tried to understand the differences, the 12mm rather than 8mm, the brass rather than aluminum, but they all looked the same, smelled the same, weighed the same on his fingertip. That was why Jamie wondered about his father sometimes. It wasn't as if he didn't know where his father was. He knew. In the back of the dwelling's yard, half hidden by all the objects his mother saved for later. Burnt out tires, crushed bicycles, porcelain children, plastic chairs, birdhouses, batteries. There stood a work shed. His father worked there late in the night, slept there too, and never emerged. His father fixed guns. Men would bring broken guns. Jamie's mother placed them on the service counter, and a day or two later, they reappeared on the service counter, fixed, just like that. Once at the yard, Doug said, I love that job. I bet he gets to try out all kinds of guns. Doug had pointed finger guns at him and said, wham, pow, as if he was killing Jamie. But Jamie never heard his father shoot the guns. Doug would say that was a wasted opportunity. Jamie didn't think his father's job would be fun, but he guessed it must be important if his father could never see anybody, and so many men came to get things fixed. Jamie felt a bit proud of that, even if he'd still rather know whether his father had a casing. And I'll stop reading there. Thank you.
Thanks, Dylan. That was really moving, again, like Corinna's. I'll maybe ask a question and then we can open it up. Your story, like Corinna's, moves through a very close focus on objects that are sort of real in our world, although yours then moves into an alternative reality. I'm just wondering, how it was that you decided to build that world that you built on the shell casing, which is this playground world of children at school.
Yeah, good question. I think writing this story was very cathartic. I was feeling quite frustrated while I was working on it. And I was thinking a lot about the social relationships between boys and how the socialization between them can lead to this enculturation of patriarchal values and of violence. So when I was thinking of the casing, I think it started off as the first idea or the first image when I was putting the story together. And then it started to draw more and more ideas together, like the way that the boys were playing with each other, the value that they were instilling in it, the way that they were using it to represent their own aspirations for what their identity could be. So I think it kind of organically snowballed a bit into becoming a focal point that was drawing in all of the elements that I was trying to work through in the story into that one object.
What about the decision to put the shell casing in the head, which then sort of takes the story out of the realm of ordinary realism? That when I remember when it came in and I first read it, that just struck me right away as brilliant, in the same way that the masks in Corinna's story were sort of brilliant. They're just something that caught my attention as a reader and took me right into that world.
Yeah, one of the things that inspired me while writing this was an interview that I had listened to. And now I can't remember who either the interviewee or the interviewer was, but the interviewee was talking about some of his research into socialization of boys. And one of the things that he mentioned was the idea that there's kind of a self-repressive instinct with that socialization. And he had this idea of boys and men turning themselves into half people by locking away so much of their emotional landscape and the potential interests and ways of interacting and relating to others that they could have. So I think like the story started from that first idea of if that kind of enculturation of this way of seeing masculine identity is in a way like separating half of the potential of your individual humanity, then what is being put in place for the other half. So I think that's where I started with the idea of half of the mind being gone, and instead you have this casing, this kind of empty vessel that is representative of the privilege and norms that are being valued or placed above a more normal or a more grounded or a more like intact human experience.
Thank you. Well, anyone else want to join in? Shazia, you've got a question, I think.
Yeah, Dylan, what you're saying about the human experience, having this kind of experience of wholeness, that really came to a head for me in your story when you were talking about when Jamie, the character of Jamie, he had such a strong reaction when he heard his dad singing. What is that about?
Yeah, I think that I wanted to have a moment in the story where the character of Jamie, who's still quite young, has an opportunity to confront this vulnerability that he's grappling with, his ability to embrace that or engage with it. So yeah, I think that he's so curious about his father through the story because it represents the possibility of a different way of being than what he is exposed to in this kind of strange or somewhat amplified version of some of the things that I was frustrated with while I was writing the story. So I think in that moment, the song is him coming into contact with what he's curious about, but it's so visceral for him because there's a huge disconnect between what he's been taught and learnt to value, and what he sees in that moment, the more carefree or joyful way of expressing and being in the world. So yeah, I guess in the story, I was trying not to be too bleak with his character. I didn't want it to seem as though this little world that had been created for the story was an inevitable destination that he had to move towards necessarily. But I also was trying to think about the social aspects of some of the themes that were included in the story and the difficulty of breaking through those kinds of social norms, even if there are alternatives that you're confronted with. For his character in the story, it's not necessarily as simple as seeing the alternative and choosing that. It's difficult to consciously move past what he's been surrounded with for so long. I'm not sure if that exactly answers your question, but yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for just dealing with such a weighty subject and masculinity. I feel like it's so rare to discuss openly and especially in a transgressive way with the stereotypical masculinity of violence just right at the front of the story. One other thing that I wanted to talk to you about was your writing style. I was really drawn to the way you describe things. So, you write the yard was flat, and before they left for their dwellings, the boys would undertake their final class, which consisted of leveling any elevation in the yard with straight razors. This class was called Applied Philosophy. Jamie excelled at it. Each bump needed to disappear, so he swept the footprints away one grain at a time, minutely and perfectly. And I feel like that's the way that you write too. Like your writing felt very measured to me as I was reading it. And I think that comes across for me in the way in your description. How many drafts do you go through usually? Do you write very slowly? I imagine you're sort of transferring your writing from a paper to computer, but I'm just going to let you answer that.
Yeah, I think for this story in particular, it only went through a couple drafts. Usually when I write, it goes through a lot of revision, but I find I'm more of a word processor person when I'm writing, just because I get really disorganized on paper easily because I'm always trying to edit as I go, which is probably not the best approach, but yeah, I think that I am really interested in writing on the level of the sentence as well. I'm really interested in how they connect to each other and how they can evoke that kind of musicality through the variation in the kinds of words that are used and the length of the sentences. So yeah, it's a good question. I think I don't reflect often on the process itself, but definitely a lot of heavy self-editing as I'm going along. I find like I always need to be rearranging the sentences, moving things around. I'll like copy my sentences and just have like a huge pile of them at the bottom of the page so that I can maybe put them back, somewhere else when I'm getting close to finishing.
Thanks, Dylan. And actually, that's a nice little segue into Shazia's story, which is about an archive and also an object. It's occurring to me in the midst of this discussion that each of the stories that we're talking about today has a very clear sort of object or set of objects at the center around which personalities and narrative move. So Shazia, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this Saturday with us. I'm joining you from the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations, also known as Toronto. I'll read a couple of pages from my story, Sylvan in Calgary. A 2-hole flat button, Madras, Calgary, a lumberjack shirt. And that's a kind of list at the top of the story. I got a job as an archivist in the basement of the university. The carpet in the room hasn't been ripped out since the 70s, when Sam Sylvan, the famous writer, worked here as a janitor. There are little white specks on the flattened fluff, as if a fine powder had been sifted from the ceiling. But no matter how much I vacuum, the tiny flecks stick like rotten seeds. Because of the pandemic situation, I can choose my hours, so I've been working night shifts, and it's just me and the vent in the walls. Sometimes when I space out after midnight, I imagine that I'm in a field of lint-like flowers, floating in green that's like any place in the prairies. But it seems to be a different country, unpeopled and filled with light, like Abrahamic heaven or a meadow in an allergy ad. The room has no windows. There are tubs filled with paper all around me against the walls. And though there are sticky notes strewn about, and columns of boxes webbed in fresh ribbons of tape, embargoed until many years after the death of so-and-so and so-and-so, Sylvan is not here, and yet he is. His files are closed, and I could open them if I wanted, since I know where they are, behind me, since it's just me here in this room, in the basement, in the building, in the east wing of the university, but I don't want to lose my job. When I first moved to Calgary from the coast, I was stunned by the Western shops selling plaid and flannel on Stephen Avenue. Not because the style was so common, because I knew the origins of the lumberjack outfit that did not begin here. There's a photo of Sylvan that's not used often, black and white. He's wearing a plaid shirt with wide checks, and his hair is brill-creamed, perfect wave bouncing light. It could be said that he's wearing a traditional Madrasi shirt. When King George IV went to Scotland in 1822, he took a liking to the bark tartan that Scots had been importing for 2 centuries from Fort St. George in India, where market and cheap checkered cotton had spun outward. The rest is obvious. I take off my red plaid flannel shirt, set it on my knees. I unhook my bra and drop it in the bin beside my desk. I breathe out hard and the fleck loosens from the carpet, floats up. I blink and it's gone. I get up and grab an empty box from the back of the room, pick a Sharpie. I fold my shirt and set it cleanly in the box, edge to edge. The collar button has come free and gleams by the toe of my shoe. I place the button in the loop of the shirt's neck like a soft seal. I close the box and write on the lid, Intangible Sylvan. It's cold, but I feel good and new. Tomorrow I'll cut my long, long hair. Pomade, shine. A broom and a dustpan. Joy Division, unknown pleasures. Sea almond. Sylvan said that janitorial work was a job just like any other job, that he was happy to do it. I drag the broom and thick swatches of my dark hair snag and spread across the carpet at the same time. I sigh. I glimpse a reflection of myself in the computer screen, and it takes me a second to realize that the person looking back at me is indeed me, Azar. For the first time in my life, the person that I am and my androgynous name are perfectly matched. I admire the wave in my cropped hair, breathe in the sweet stink of pomade still in the room. Last week over the phone, Mom told me that she used to eat sea almond while growing up on the coast. I imagined moist brown nuts in a bed of kelp, but she said sea almond looked more like raw avocado, that when it hung from the trees and was seen from an angle, its perched seams were like the pout of rich queen. I pout. Then I sit on the chair and I pull out my lip liner. I put on my headphones and Ian Curtis sings. I traveled far and wide through many different times. I draw in my lips with a warmed pencil and watch myself become defined, more real. The whole day blooms like this, pouting, picking my hair off the carpet, sorting, cleaning. When my phone buzzes at 6 p.m., I go upstairs to pick up my grocery delivery from the Caribbean store across the city in Northeast Calgary. It is almost dark outside, the last light breaking through the stars. I'll end there. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Shazia. One of the things that strikes me about your story is that it's set in effect in a kind of basement where a writer's remains are stored. And then the main character is a janitor, so not a researcher. And I'm wondering if you could say just a little bit more about what the kind of world you're trying to create there and the relationships, because this is a character who's relating to a writer who's not there, who's there in sort of boxed form and hidden away from the world. Right?
Yeah, I'd say it all started when I was trying to access the archives of Samuel Selvon at the University of Calgary, and someone said, they're locked up, you can't access them. And I kind of, in my total bitch move, I said, of course I can. I know the archive. I know what's in the archive. I'm going to access the archive regardless of whatever you say. And so I made my own archive by guessing the contents of Selvon's life. And I came up with this kind of intangible Selvon archive, which is in the story, which forms the list of each section that breaks up the story and organizes it into segments. Yeah. And Selvon was a janitor actually, before he became a writer in residence at the University of Calgary. So I was playing with those roles, and it was COVID, and I was stuck in the basement. So
is it perhaps a sort of sign of the way the world of short stories in particular is, boxed away in a basement? It's not the sort of thing that publishers wanted to touch. We're all here discussing it, but if you think about it, the novel is the default sort of genre in the publishing world, and here you've got this archive. It's inaccessible, and then someone imagining it. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, I know publishers always going on about the death of the short story, but I haven't found that to be true personally for me. I mean, my students love reading stories. I love reading stories. There's just the perfect amount of reading on a train or a bus. And I think that they kind of give you this glimpse of life, but in the way that novels zoom out and give you a scope of many lives together, short stories kind of give you a glimpse of life at a particular moment in time. I don't know why my mind is not running away from this analogy that I've had since this morning, but I feel like so in the 18th century, when landscape painters used to draw mountains, they used to do it through this contraption that was like a compact mirror. And they had this obsidian glass in the mirror, and they would look at this compact mirror in order to draw the mountain, in order to sketch it, to bring it to scale. And I feel like poets are right very close to the mountain. They're seeing the rock. They can see the details. Sometimes they don't even know what the difference is between the rock and the mountain. And then short story writers are kind of like the landscape painters in that they're seeing it from a bit of a distance, but that distance is contrived in a sense. And then the novelists, they become the mountain, and they go into the mountain, around the mountain. So I'm thinking of short stories as a sense of scale and what they can tell us about life at that scale. So I think, Dylan, I think in your author interview for the festival, you had said short stories have this different sense of scope compared to novels. So I think that short stories have this perfect kind of scope. They can give you a glimpse into the life of someone without the whole. Now I'm going on about my whole entire life, so I'm going to stop.
Yeah, and that links all the stories. We have the masks, we have the bullet casings, we have the boxed remains of the writer, and as we'll see in a little while, we've also got a dead bird, right? And so that's a neat spatial analogy. So, but I'll also open the floor up if anyone wants to ask a question, Shazia, about this or make a comment. Dylan?
Yeah, one of the things that I really loved about this story was the structure and form, the tiny epigraphs or quotes at the beginning. and the story being divided into these sections, it almost feels as though the reader is being invited into a series of archival boxes about the protagonist, just as they are relating to the writer that they're interested in, and extrapolating about their life from these small details. We get to see these really rich, specific details about the protagonist and kind of extrapolate from that. I thought it was really like depth, the way that through the details about the music, like even down to the lyric that they're listening to, the relationship with this other character, Clara, we get to see so much suggested, even though it's not being made explicit, or having a ton of time working through all of the different various aspects of it. It's asking a lot of the reader to go to the story and engage with it. So I was really curious, like when you were making these little boxes and finding these very specific, wonderful details about the protagonists and their life and the things going on around them, like what was your process for curating those details so that the reader could have this kind of full glimpse through just the small objects?
Thank you, Dylan, for reading the story so carefully and for those compliments. I'm really feeling it. Much appreciated. I think that when I was thinking about how to access this archive that I essentially wasn't allowed to access, I kind of had to make impressions. So I made a list essentially of whatever was coming up for me when I thought about Sam Sylvan and things like the Joy Division album. They weren't related, not directly, but I feel like I always trust that whatever comes to me about a certain thing, whatever associations arise, are a part of that moment that's kind of auguring magically towards the story. So I think I let those impressions build the story. So it's essentially like an exercise in trust now that I'm thinking about it, the way that you've talked about it too, just really beautifully with the form and how those sections guided the form in the story. And so much of what we do as writers is to trust what comes to us. And I feel that with your story too, you know, the casings, it's like an extended metaphor throughout the whole story.
Anyone else want to join in with a question? Bill, good, sure. You're
Just,
muted.
am I here now?
Yeah.
Okay. Just a quick one to add on. Very rarely does a story affect, does writing affect someone visually? But I thought, as Iain, you were suggesting that the sections of the story were, suggestive of archival boxes. I thought the whole story was very suggestive of the fact that there are no paragraphs. For readers, for people here who haven't seen the story, there are no paragraphs at all. It's a box, and it gives a sense of claustrophobia, and also it really suggests to me the very contained flow of a mind. There are no, like, a mind in its constant flow of thinking has no paragraphs really, and this is just this constant flow. So I really felt it brought me instantly into the scenario and the claustrophobia and all that sort of thing, everything running together. I just wanted to mention that because it very rarely does a story affect me visually, and this one did in a great way.
Thank you for sharing that, Bill. Yeah. Story is definitely claustrophobic, and I feel like I felt that as I was writing too. And the impressions really helped me break it up in a way, because it all came out very quickly, because I was writing kind of as a revenge, with the motivation of revenge to access this archive, to say, no, I can definitely access this archive. So I was writing very quickly with a lot of anger and a lot of claustrophobia. And I feel like the impressions helped me break it up. But I didn't want to I felt like it just wasn't the kind of story where I would have paragraphs and regular dialogue, because even the dialogue's couched in there. For some reason, it just didn't feel right. So I just trusted and went with it. Thank you for noticing that.
And thank you, Shazia. Well, that's a nice segue into Bill's story. And we have a different kind of claustrophobia in Bill's story at the end, with everyone crowded into a shared social space. So Bill, over to you.
Thanks, Iain, and thanks everyone. I'll just jump right in. I never know when I need glasses now. I just had 2 lenses, my eyes done. I never know what I'm going to get. This is, I'll read the start of Jack's Christmas dinner. A rare knock at the door let Dale stop mid-dial. He'd call his son tomorrow, though there was never a good time. It was always awkward talking to Ben. The call was to confirm what everyone already knew, that Dale wouldn't be flying to Montreal for Christmas. He hadn't flown back in years, but it was still hard to announce it, despite the relief that would radiate in all directions. At the door, Dale was surprised to see his tenant, old Jack, with a huge storm-colored bird dangling dead from his hand. Jack had a favor to ask. Dale, the truck's fine, no dent, but I killed this bird with it, and I wonder if I can bleed it under your deck. Because, he gave the leg a shake that pulsed through the body and whipped the head. Why not eat it? Dale wasn't as surprised as he might have been. Wild turkeys roamed the forest, skinny dark shadows, descendants of long ago escaped domestic fowl, kept in check by cougars and the occasional poacher, and vehicle like the truck Jack had borrowed from Dale this morning. Once Dale saw a car coming towards him stop at the rainbow-colored crosswalk in front of the school. No kids anywhere, but he slowed up too, then saw the turkey standing there as if waiting to cross. The other driver was waving excitedly, making sure he saw it. When he rolled to a stop, the bird crossed, like a well-trained child, but thrusting its head forward at each step like a giant pigeon. The lady in the other car really lost it then, bouncing in hilarity while the bird got to the other side. Dale had no idea what to say to Jack, so he said okay and followed him around back and under the deck. Jack took twine from his black tracksuit pocket, and with the bird dangling from one hand and twine from the other, he dragged over an old chair with his foot. Old Jack was ostentatiously handy, and Dale sometimes felt instructed. He could smell an awful smell now, awful because it was unidentifiable. The bird's feathers were hard with mud and what looked like shit. Not regular white bird shit, but yellow. Jack had some smeared on the thigh of his tracksuit. Don't you pluck it before you, bleed it? No. Maybe you should spray it with the hose? I went online at the library and learned you don't skin game because it stays fresh with its outer layer on, like it's insulated within its own cooler is the idea. Okay, Dale said. Competing with the bird's smell was the understanding that Jack had parked at the library to do research while a dead turkey lay in its own shit in the bed of Dale's truck. Dale liked his old truck. No rust at all, and its red had faded to that nice pink brown. The Island Arborist sign on both doors had also faded and was fittingly difficult to read. He'd retired a year ago. The turkey's head was featherless, just warty red skin resembling raw burger meat, beady eyes staring out from the mess. Its beak was bigger and more hooked than you would have thought. It struck Dale that you were charmed by a hummingbird, you admired an eagle, you felt friendly with a robin, but nothing like that came from this turkey. Jack wouldn't accept help as he gripped the bird's leg with one hand and made a loop in the twine with the other. He winced to stretch high as he could and flipped the twine over a deck joist. He managed to tie a knot, then let it all go, and it stayed. Stepping off the chair, he stood back to assess things. The birds spun slowly, uncannily not losing speed. Jack said, "And I mean, Christmas is in a couple days. You want to eat this with me?" Stop there.
Thanks, Bill. It struck me now in this context, hearing you read that like Corinna's story, your story plunges the reader into a kind of visceral world, disgusting the reader in some ways right at the beginning. But Corinna takes her story in the direction of tragedy and family tragedy. Yours goes in a comic direction. I'm just wondering what decided you to sort of go from that kind of disgust towards comedy, which is, you know, one of the things that we have in comedy is that play with bodily stuff. But we've seen two different ways that you can take disgust and create a world out of it in the story today.
Yeah, one thing about the story, it's an odd story for me because it's the last story of this new collection that's coming out in the spring. And it's the first time I've kind of fallen for the whole idea of linked stories. It's kind of it's not quite novelistic, but it's the last story of a collection. And as such, what it does, all these characters reappear. And this is I stole this from Dee Crane's collection, Every Happy Family, it's called. Dee Dee's my partner, by the way. But in any case, in her collection, everybody reappears and comes back some years later, and we see how they've, you know, grown or disintegrated or, you know, got complicated or simpler, all that sort of thing. So this story does the same thing. So they actually have Jack, who's he's the main character through the linked stories, old Jack. He's not old in the first story. He's the protagonist that gets everything going. But Jack has seen that Dale is very lonely. He's a loner. He lives alone. He's, as it's set up at the beginning, he doesn't see his son even, or his ex-partner for years. And so Jack connives to have a Christmas party, Christmas dinner. And they go through all these lists, and it's mostly other loners, other people that we've seen already in the collection. And they gather and eat this. Well, I don't know if I should give away. It's not even the turkey. It's worse than that. It's worse than a turkey. So that's how. And I don't know. It's kind of it's funny, as it should be at the end. They all, not all of them, but a lot of them drink too much. Jack is a teetotaler, but he's had addiction problems, so Jack doesn't drink anything or take anything, but most of them drink too much. And the Mushroom King comes kind of uninvited, and most of them nibble some shrooms, and they have a great old time, and it's funny.
Thank you. Corinna, you haven't had a chance to ask anything yet. Would you like to join in?
Yes, sure. So my question is sort of about the central image of this story, which Iain mentioned already. You know, the story revolves around this image. I think it's really interesting. I was kind of enamored with the way you describe the bird throughout the story, and how the bird as an image kind of evolves almost in tandem with the evolution of the characters. And there's a kind of transformation that happens. Again, I'll try not to give anything away, but maybe like the bird transforms, not in terms of like a physical transformation, but like a transformation of perception on the part of not only our protagonist, but all the other characters, I think, in the story as well. So I was curious about whether you built the story around the image of the bird, and if this was kind of the genesis of what's happening with these characters, and if your intention was to kind of mirror the Jack's conflict in what happens to the bird.
I don't remember, to be honest, how it progressed. I do know I had a kind of a wicked, I like having fun, and it was kind of a wicked sense of more and more disgust. Especially one of my first readers is my old best friend, Joan McLeod. She's a playwright, also in Victoria, and so I was really cruel. She has a rat phobia, and I knew she would be reading this. And those of you who read this story, you know, almost half the turkey gets eaten by a rat. But they persist, or Jack persists and forces it on everybody. They're going to have this wonderful turkey supper, which, well, I think some people have read this. So it's actually a vulture. And Jack takes it upon himself to, he thinks it's the job of a warrior, which he fancies himself a warrior-like, to eat the whole thing, which he does. And
did you always have this intention to have it be a turkey initially, but then we find out later that it's a vulture? I mean, I love
yeah, I had that much in mind. Yeah, I had that much in mind. That came from it's funny, here on the island, there are lots of turkey vultures everywhere around Victoria and everything, but there are a whole bunch flying over our back lot. And one day, sitting here with our dog Sally has since died, but I was sitting there in the living room with Sally, and she was very old, and I'm old. And I looked up, and through our front window on our front lawn, there was this vulture standing there looking in the window at us, which I've never heard I've never heard that happening. I've never seen it happening. So I was wondering which one of us was this vulture looking at. So from then on, the vulture became central. It seems like such a...
I noticed when you were reading the story, you left out the line where the character thinks out loud. It almost looks like a vulture, doesn't it? Was that deliberate?
Yeah, well, I edited it out. Since I've actually, I can't return to any of my work without, I'm sure a lot of you are like this, without editing, because I thought, I didn't want people to guess that it was a vulture yet, kind of thing. So I've edited that out, and it'll be edited out when it appears in the collection. Yeah.
Although it's interesting, whether one knows or guesses that or not, in a way, it doesn't matter. I mean, all of the stories, we see the characters in relation to an object, the masks, the shell casings, the archival boxes, the turkey, and their relation to it is sort of set up with our relation to it as readers, right? And so there's both the sort of dramatic irony of what we know and they don't know, but then we don't always know everything either, right? And that's what's interesting about all of these stories, is the kind of revelations that each of them opens to, which are both surprising and expected at the same time. And that's one of the really satisfying things about a story, is to be surprised and satisfied at the same time, rather than feeling tricked, right?
Yes. Could I just wanted to mention to Dylan, not to get personal with stories, but sometimes it's wonderful when we are affected personally. I just wanted to say that the shell casings, really odd object to have, and the fact that it's not a full bullet, it's a spent bullet, which kind of is in a way emasculating, or it just shows the emptiness of the male pose. And I just wanted to say that my father, who was 6'4", brush cut. He was in the U.S. Navy, and he had a collection of bullets and shells and shell casings, which I grew up with, this collection of shell casings. And it's really odd, because he was the gentlest, kindest person you could ever meet. But yet he had this persona that he felt compelled to carry with him, of this, military, weaponry, all that kind of thing. You could see him torn. He was quite torn in half by this whole thing. So it really affected me. That image, I was startled by your choice of shell casings out of so many possible objects you could have used. So I just wanted to report on that. And thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. We're sort of 10 minutes within the end, so we can open the floor up and also to questions from the audience if they have any. It occurs to me, just going back to a question that Shazia asked too, about the shell casings or about the singing, is you have the singing is this fullness that's coming from inside a male being, and then the shells stand for the kind of empty masculinity that they're being socialized into. None of that has to be stated, right? Because as in all of these stories, the images are doing that conceptual work for us as readers, and even if it's not articulated for us, we can feel it, as you said, Bill, with the shells or Shazia responding to that, the singing like that. Some of you may have further questions that you want to ask one another here. So please feel free to do that while we wait for any questions that might come from those who are tuning in today.
Yeah, well, first I just wanted to say thanks, Bill, for that comment. I think like that's a really insightful point and something that I wasn't thinking about today, but I was thinking about when writing the story, is that kind of part of identity is so performative. And I think a large part of that story for me is how we maybe restrict ourselves and who we would like to be in favor of trying to present a different version of ourselves to other people in order to gain respect, or what we feel is respect from others. And I also I had a question about your story, Bill. When I was reading it, I found the setting was so evocative. It felt really like I was visiting a Gulf island, and like all of the characters, they felt like people that I had met in that sense. And I was just curious. I know some people, when they approach fiction, they think of setting almost like another character in the story. And I was curious, especially after hearing that the characters in that story are all kind of their own protagonists in other stories of the collection. What was your approach to setting, like what role do you feel it has in like the world of those stories? Is it like almost like an active character?
Yeah, thanks for that, Dylan. I think so. I think it very much is active. I've taken Gabriola's character, if you'd like, and it's not called Gavel Island anymore. It's now called Tunnel Island, the book. But basically, I've taken Gabriola Island with its character of being a refuge for a lot of city people, a lot of counterculture people way back when, like all the islands. It's got a heavy indigenous presence. Mostly, it's got it's a collection of a lot of loners or people that, for whatever reason, didn't want to be where they were, and they are here now. There's a heavy music scene amongst 70-year-olds. That's fantastic. You know, there are open mic nights 5 nights a week in 2 different bars, which are very almost hallucinogenic, just seeing the characters. It's really weird. It's being in 6 time zones at once, or eras. So I'm taking that Gabriola character and expanding it up. I made it a bigger island. It has a college because I needed that. I needed a college in it, and I needed a different kind of bar called the Ark. But yeah, Gabriola's character is very much, it's in every story. Yeah.
We have a question from one of the audience members about the fact that all of the stories are dealing with the identities of their characters, which are reflected through their relations to this sort of central objects that we've been talking about. And so this questioner is wondering to what extent all of you as authors find that your own identities are reflected in your work as short story writers, or whether that's not the case. And you can take that up in any order that you want. Corinna?
I can start, sure. I think that word performative is an interesting one for me, particularly in the context of this story, because I think that is something, that question of what it means to perform one's identity is really central to this story. So I think something that Ivy, the main character, is grappling with is like the disconnect maybe between her identity as an artist and her identity as just a person. And she kind of has this tendency to maybe conflate the two. She's also really striving to be important and to be noticed as an artist. And so there is a kind of performative aspect to that. You know, she has this desire to embody the kind of artist that she respects herself. So I think that's definitely a reflection for me of some of the struggles that I have when I'm, thinking about making art or writing. Yeah, just I think unavoidably ourselves come out in our writing, but we're also grappling for a kind of truth in the act of writing, and so where those two things kind of disconnect sometimes, or the question of how to get to that truth while also taking on this persona of the writer at the same time. I think it's a really interesting one to contend with. So yeah, I think it's for me. I'm always, I think, putting myself into the work and my own kind of internal struggles into my characters.
Thank you, Corinna. We just have a couple of minutes. This is like radio broadcast where towards the end of the interview, the interviewer is saying the bell is coming. So Shazia or Dylan, Shazia, you're unmuted there. So
Sure, yeah. Thank you for that question, Gia. I think that Corinna, what you said about emotional truth is really resonating for me, because I feel like even though the characters might not reflect me, their embodied knowledge is reflective of my experience and how I live in some sense. So for example, in Sylvan in Calgary, there's a part where she eats sea almond or orders them. I've never had sea almond. I relate to Sam Sylvan because he's a Londoner. But my mom has had sea almond. And so she knew what it was. And this image just came to me as I was writing the story. And I was like, why am I thinking about sea almond? I've never eaten this thing. But my mom told me, she explained what the fruit looked like, what it was like to eat it, what it looked like on the tree. And so I took that as my own kind of embodied knowledge of that fruit. So the character does eat it, but I have not had that, but still it's emotionally true. So I feel like there's something there with the embodied knowledge.
thank you, Shazia. Looks like I have to say my thank yous to all of you, Shazia, Bill, Corinna, and Dylan, for really wonderful readings and responses to the questions. I also want to thank Laura Trunke and the team at the VFA for making this event possible, all the behind the scenes things that went on. My colleague at the Malahat Review, Lemore Lissick, and I'm going to turn it back to Kagan, who's going to wind things up for us. So thanks to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Iain. Thank you all for attending this panel, and especially to our moderators and authors, Dylan, Corinna, Bill, Shazia, and Iain. If you're interested in purchasing any of the books featured here today, please support festival sponsor and VFA bookseller Munro Books. You can find the books featured during the festival in-store and online at munrobooks.com. As a special bonus for joining us this afternoon, the books featured at the panel will be 20% off at Munro's with the promo code BFA2024. There are more events tonight and tomorrow, so please visit the website victoriafestivalofauthors.ca to view our festival program. This year, most festival events are available online. Our website also features Q&As with all the authors participating in VFA 2024. So as a place for you to sign up, and there is a place for you to sign up to get our newsletter. If you would like to support the festival in any other way, please visit us on Facebook and Instagram and engage your friends to attend one of our upcoming events. You can also make a tax-deductible donation to the Victoria Festival authors through our website or the VFA page at Canada Helps. Your donation helps keep the VFA an engaging, accessible, and sustainable festival. We hope to see you at our next Zoom event, Beyond the Page, Redefining the Modern Writer's Journey. And that's today at 3:30 Pacific time. This event, curated and moderated by Shalene Knight, features authors Helen Knott, Jen Suk-Fong Lee, and Christina Myers. So we'll see you there.